Hey guys, and welcome to another episode where I want to today look at sound with you and how it is used in the media. We often forget that sound plays a huge part in the experience of the media and has certainly changed in its use over time. I'd like to jump straight in and look at the types of sound, but also some of the more advanced behind the scenes considerations of sound, especially in the use of TV and film. There are only two types of sound that exist within the world of film, and we begin with the first type of sound, diegetic. Be careful of the spelling here. Lots of students spell it with an A instead of the correct E. Diegetic sound, diegetic. Diegetic sound refers to sound which is natural and is expected within the scene. Examples would include dialogue. We would expect humans to make the sounds of talking naturally, like I'm doing right now. This could also include whistling, humming, burping, anything that the human voice can do naturally and is expected naturally within the scene. It can also include other natural types of sound made by creatures. For example, birds chirping or dogs barking, for example. A sound again naturally being made. Nature type sounds could also be included in this. Wind and rain are good examples. Non-diegetic sound then would be those which are non-natural and often man-made. In the realm of film, we consider the following as good examples: music, voiceover or narration, and sound effects. Non-diegetic sounds will often create, in many people's opinions, a greater sense of atmosphere in the narrative than diegetic. And this is a good debate to maybe get into. Which is more important? You will have watched films with key scenes of music or soundtrack which created a great sense of understanding of the film or the scene's tone or mood, or better still, you recognize the mode of address, again, because of the music. Without them, would the scene or film have been the same? Have you ever experienced a film without sound or very low volume audio and not being brought to the same heightened experience? Would film be produced differently if the director or the producer knew that there would be no use of music within the final product? Consider how important music is as a non-diegetic sound example within the media you watch, especially with technologies like surround sound or Dolby Atmos, where we can now move music, particularly around the cinema or the room you sat in, to create a greater sense of space and immersion for you as the audience. Think about what it also adds to the emotion and understanding of the story. How much of an importance would you consider using music in a media production you create? Perhaps coursework, or if you were to produce a film, would you class it as essential? Another great example of non-diegetic sound is sound effects. And these are already an importance. For example, in action films or science fiction films, the genre film, would the films sound the same or feel the same without sound effects? Star Wars is a classic example with lightsaber sounds, or the use of alien type sounds, which are of course fictitious, but they play a huge part in giving a sense of realism to what we watch. Here we have some very well-known examples of films where the use of sound effects help to bring the characters' actions into reality. And we, the audience, move to believe that these hand-drawn objects, these cartoons, themselves are actually responsible for making these sounds by interacting with the world around them. Space Jam, Looney Tunes Back in Action, and of course the very famous Roger Rabbit are all good examples of this. Every time the cartoon characters would open a door, place an object down on a surface, we would hear the sound of that happening. Now, the cartoon character themselves are not making that sound naturally. It's being recorded separately and added in later, and it's making us realize with good timing that we are hearing them do that actual action. And what we're referring to here, this idea about sound being recorded and then lined up, almost well-timed, is recorded as Foley Sound. This is still non-diegetic, and this is taking your understanding a little further here. This again is where sound effects are recorded separately to where the actor or the subject doing them on first take. It makes the sound so much more clearer, and it helps the audience to recognize that item's place in the audio mix. This idea was started by a gentleman named Jack Foley, and he would re-record things being acted out in films to then be better heard later. Most films, if not all, use this idea, as well as now most TV shows. And it's been a technique used in many radio plays as well, and radio soaps, from around the 1930s, 40s. If you ever get to watch behind the scenes of this, please do. Here's a good example from King Kong, and I'm going to mute the audio here in this example, but you can see what the Foley artists, the people who record the items individually, will be recording in the studio. Original props, using original costumes, the clothes, everything that was used in the film, they would get and then re-record their use of. So perhaps the use of knives and forks, again, anything that's being used in the film, the boats, might be thinking already, how many times do objects get broken, smashed or destroyed? And how much sound therefore is being recorded as separate items. It's a lot of work. So you will see recording artists, often called Foley artists, go out and record everything they need for later on in the audio mix. But Foley artists will record around 90–95% of anything the actors used or interacted with, including vehicles or anything within the setting and scene. So think how long that takes to cover the recording of every single thing happening in a 2-hour film. Every door opening, every weapons sound, every breaking of something, every time a character walks, like hearing footsteps example. It's an awful lot of work, but it adds a great sense of clarity to the film. So when we're in the cinema and we've got music going on around us and it's loud and climactic, we can still noticeably hear those individual sound effects. Because they've been recorded separately, they can be controlled in their volume as well in the mix. So they come through with a much clearer tone, the mood is much more suitable, and the mode of address, again what that producer or director is looking to create, all comes through better to us, the audience. Let me share with you a quick example of before and after without any recorded Foley sounds, and then the finished version. Listen carefully for the difference in clarity in each item individually, particularly the guns being picked up.
Away in your own little thing and do what you want, and at the end of the day you come out with a really good sound. That's a good thing. That's what I like about it. When you play it all back and it works.
Moving on from sound effects, we also mentioned that voiceover is a good example of a non-diegetic sound, as the audience is not expected to hear a voice within an everyday situation, almost the booming voice of God scenario. Often at the start of films, a voiceover will introduce the premise, perhaps, of the narrative. Think of a typical pantomime, where you, the audience, are introduced to the characters, the setting, and of course a voiceover is used. Voiceovers can create a very clear mode of address and set that tone. And they can also be very iconic with some of the voices used. You might agree with me in that people like Morgan Freeman or Kiefer Sutherland, used on purpose, create and shape kind of the mode of address very quickly just by hearing their voice. Now again, quite interesting here, like sound effects as Foley sound being re-recorded, actors will also re-record all of their lines, their script, their dialogue, what they say. This happens after they have acted, after they have recorded the scene. Later on, they'll go away and re-record all of their lines. And not many people know this. And again, this is used in almost all film, and now today, most modern TV will also use this as well. The actors return to the studio and they have to get themselves back into the very same character or situation as they played it live. And you've got to remember that they were perhaps playing a fearful or heroic or a sad, excited, whatever it was, performance. And this can take a long time. The actors would of course need to re-record not only their words, but also any other mouth movement that would need to be heard by the audience. So for example, breaths, both in and out, sighs, yawns, yells, screams, absolutely anything they did in the first time of acting, they need to redo again. This process is called ADR, which stands for Automatic Dialogue Replacement or Additional Dialogue Recording. Same thing. It's a great way of covering up anything which went wrong or bad during filming. So if you had background noise getting in the way, planes flying overhead, if you had crying babies in the background, or something happened on set, somebody sneezed for example, it could have been anything, it could of course be then muted and covered up with the ADR later. Anyone who's worked on a film set or a TV show will know that mistakes happen, and using something like ADR is a great way to fix problems and also, more importantly, to reshape the story. Editors will have now the option of placing different or modified, better, re-recorded versions of the same line into the final edit. Perhaps, for example, the actor on the day wasn't feeling too well and they didn't give enough performance. However, in the ADR version recorded later, they can give more volume, they can become more dramatic. So ADR is actually quite a lifesaver for a director's or a producer's perspective. It could also be quite useful for actors who have to provide accents during acting. Not all actors can speak French or German, for example, fluently. And often they are replaced with another different actor who can, and they record their ADR lines for them. And then it's synced up and their lip movements are matched. So again, to us, the audience, it sounds much more authentic. We all remember the embarrassing reality of Zac Efron in High School Musical, where someone else actually was doing the voice of his ADR as a professional singer. Zac Efron couldn't sing in that same way, so his voice was removed and replaced with an ADR version of a professional singer. So we, the audience, believed when watching the scene that that was Zac's voice. It happens all the time. You can often see ADR issues or problems in lots of low-budget adverts, where it isn't finished to a good standard or is slightly out of time, or the voice clearly doesn't match the age of the actor on screen. They've used someone who doesn't relate. Next time you're watching a film, listen out for these, both the use of Foley Sounds and ADR. It is really impressive what they do. If it's done properly, you wouldn't be able to spot it. And you might be thinking at this point, this must take a long time. And you're right, months can be spent in the studios recording it all, or waiting perhaps for actors to finish other films and productions they're doing until their lines can be re-recorded. Or for example, the Foley artists haven't got the right breaking glass, or they haven't been able to get the original props back yet. It can take an awful long time. But again, having these as individual elements, ADR, Foley, music, allows us as the mixers, the producers, the directors to then control the volume levels. You might actually remember the bad experience of where The Dark Knight Rises had a bit of an issue with Bane, the character played by Tom Hardy, the antagonist, where his ADR had been recorded, but it had been recorded on purpose in a muffled manner because the character wore a mask. When it came to the final edit, the ADR didn't have enough volume against some of the music and other sound effects. And rightly so, audiences complained. You can still research this now. And they simply couldn't hear what Tom Hardy was saying. This is a really important point here. As a producer, is there anything more important than the dialogue? If the audience can't understand what the characters are saying, then the narrative's not going to make any sense. And you might be thinking as a producer yourself, okay, if I was in charge, what is more important? Music, ADR, Sound effects? Where do I put these in terms of volume importance? Should the music always be the loudest part? Should the dialogue be the loudest? You'll often see audio mixers or audio technicians have hundreds literally of channels of audio where they have every single sound on separate sliders. And again, it's a great thing to get into if you love sound. If we were to step back and consider how film is actually created, you could, and often it is the case, start with no sound at all. Have you ever listened to something on the radio, like a play, or been to a pantomime, and you notice that the door opening is always the same? The footsteps always sound the same? A lot of media institutions, producers, or whatever, will buy what's called sound libraries. And they literally just have MP3s, lists of audio files, which are walking on gravel, walking on concrete, walking on wood, whatever it might be. And that is used, and you hear it so often worldwide, because a lot of the time it's easier for people to buy a sound than go out and record it. Maybe they don't have Foley artists at hand. So how about we test this idea? And right now we'll stop all the audio and we'll start with some background atmosphere. Okay, sounds good. And now we'll add some music. Okay, sounds quite tense. And now I'll add some Foley sounds. Someone walking? No. It's just the environment I've created through the sound. Essentially, this is what film does. It strips the audio for everything and adds it all back in later, and we can create any environment we want to. If you haven't, please do listen to some soap radio operas online, such as The Archers, as a great example of hearing worlds without seeing them. I'd encourage you to really listen to your films, TV, and even your computer games in a really close-up way. Put the magnifying glass to what you're hearing. How good is this Foley sound? Is the film using mainly diegetic or non-diegetic sound? Does the music really make a difference to that scene? Think about analysing what you hear. To appreciate this effort, here's a quick section from Roger Rabbit, the very famous film. Here you can hear individual items being dropped on him. And you can imagine as individual Foley sounds, the pots, the pans, the bottles, they would have had to have been recorded separately and then timed with the image in such an incredible way so that when they hit him on the screen, you hear the sound. It's very, very clever. Imagine how long this would have taken. Take note, how many sounds are you hearing here? Quite a lot. So I hope you enjoyed that. A lot of examples, as you could hopefully have heard. And again, really well timed, flawless, and almost organic in the way those items fell and dropped and then hit him in a very synchronized manner. Very, very clever. For those who might want to challenge what we've looked at today, and here's a really good question. Now that you know that an actor's voice, their dialogue, would have been recorded separately as ADR, when you now hear dialogue in the film, is it diegetic or is it non-diegetic? Some would argue it's diegetic. It's expected within the scene. You expect to hear humans make noise when they talk. It's natural sound. Well, they're right. But ADR is re-recorded. It's separate to the moment of initial recording, and it's no doubt had effects put on it like EQ, echo, reverb, and other stylized outcomes. So technically, isn't it now non-diegetic? It's modified. It's been recorded and it's man-made. Interesting question. When you stop and think about it, how much sound in film is actually created? Is anything you hear naturally made sound? Just a technical question and something to get into, particularly at A level. I hope you've enjoyed looking at sound and how useful it can be in changing the understanding of the way audiences experience media. Thanks guys for subscribing and supporting the content. Please feel free to send questions in and comments. And until next time, take care, stay safe, see you soon.